Hi everyone, my name is Haley,
Hi, I'm Josh.
and we are here today with the Center for Women and Families, and we're going to talk to you all about unhealthy relationships and how to support a friend. The Center for Women and Families is a nonprofit organization in southern Indiana and Kentucky. We provide supportive services for people who have experienced relationship violence and sexual violence, but a big part of our work is also preventing that violence from happening in the first place. If you've seen a presentation with us before or watched one of our other videos, you know that we go around and talk to young people about topics like healthy relationships, unhealthy relationships, boundaries, communication, consent, all of that stuff. But today we're going to be focusing on unhealthy relationships and how to support a friend. To get us started, again, we're just going to go over these resources. These first three resources are anonymous, so you don't have to give any identifying information if you don't feel comfortable. Again, today we might bring up some topics that make you want to ask some questions or seek out support from somebody else. So please utilize those resources if you feel that way. And then again, at the bottom are Josh and I's email addresses. That's not going to be anonymous, but we're always happy to answer questions about what we're talking about in this video today and talk with you all.
Okay, so a couple of key points about unhealthy relationships before we really get into it. So the first one I want to note is that unhealthy behaviors are incredibly common. Many of us have behaved in unhealthy ways without even realizing it before, and our goal here is just to recognize those unhealthy behaviors as unhealthy and learn from our mistakes. The second one, just like we talked about in the previous video, just as healthy relationships can have unhealthy moments, they're not going to be healthy 100% of the time. Unhealthy relationships can have healthy moments as well. People are complex and relationships are too. Another thing is that every relationship is different. One thing that may have been healthy in a past relationship could be unhealthy in a next relationship. Just because something worked one time doesn't mean it'll work the next. The best thing to do here is just check in and communicate with your partner. And the last thing to note is that it's important to recognize unhealthy behaviors for what they are. Unfortunately, things that could seem harmless or just start out as annoying or frustrating could escalate into abuse. This is not to say that every unhealthy relationship or even most become abusive, but abusive behaviors typically start as some of the unhealthy ones we're going to go over. All right, so just as I mentioned before, while everyone does unhealthy things, sometimes we can all learn to love better by recognizing unhealthy signs and shifting to unhealthy behaviors. So going back to One Love again, they have a really great list of 10 signs of an unhealthy relationship. So go ahead and pause the video, click on the link in the description below, and then come back and Hila will go over it.
All right, so hopefully you all did pause the video and went to take a look at the website. If you didn't, again, I really encourage you to. They have great information on there. But now we're just going to discuss a few key takeaways from what you all read about unhealthy relationships. So first off, I want to emphasize that your partner's unhealthy behaviors are never your fault. We know that sometimes in unhealthy or abusive relationships, the person exhibiting that unhealthy behavior might deflect responsibility or convince the other person that it's their fault in some way or blame another reason for their unhealthy behavior. But it's never your fault if somebody else is behaving that way, so don't blame yourself for it. And then on the flip side of that, we are all responsible for recognizing our own healthy behaviors. Like we've said a few times already, we all behave in unhealthy ways sometimes, but that doesn't mean that it's okay to continue that behavior. So we all need to strive to have that self-awareness to realize when we're exhibiting unhealthy behavior and then work to fix it and work to behave in a more healthy way in our relationships. In a relationship, you should never feel unsafe, like you're walking on eggshells or afraid of your partner's reactions. So One Love, they refer to this as volatility as a sign of an unhealthy relationship. And it's like that roller coaster in a relationship. So ups and downs all the time. You have really low lows and really high highs. So that's definitely a red flag that your relationship might be unhealthy. You should never be afraid of a partner's reaction, afraid of what to say or what not to say, and you should never feel unsafe in a relationship. And then some unhealthy behaviors may seem romantic in the beginning, So for example, your partner wants to spend all their time with you. They don't want you hanging out with friends as much. They show up unannounced to your home or your class or your friend's house because they know that you're there. So in the beginning, that might seem sweet because you both want to spend a lot of time with each other, and they may say that it's just because they love you so much and they love spending time with you so much. But it's really important to watch that behavior because it could turn into some possessiveness of you, possessiveness of your time, isolation, not letting you hang out with friends as much, controlling who you talk to and who you don't talk to. So even though some of those behaviors may seem sweet and romantic in the beginning, it's important to pay attention to those and set those boundaries that you're comfortable with in the beginning of the relationship, and make sure that you maintain those boundaries and communicate those boundaries. So in an abusive relationship, one person consistently has more power and control over the other person. So a question that Josh and I get a lot is, what's the difference between an unhealthy relationship and an abusive relationship? Unfortunately, there's not going to be one blanket answer for every single relationship. An abusive relationship is when one person does have all of that power and control and is controlling the other person's behavior. Another point that we want to make is that abusive doesn't just mean physical violence. It can include emotional violence, verbal abuse, isolation from family and friends, threatening, all of that kind of stuff. So when we say abusive, we don't just mean physical. And then lastly, if you're not sure if a behavior is unhealthy or abusive, please talk about it with somebody that you trust. It's okay just to ask that question of, is this normal, or does this happen in your relationship? This could be a friend, it could be a teacher, a parent, or it could be one of those resources that we listed at the beginning. Again, some of those are anonymous, so you can reach out to them without saying who you are, just to begin that conversation, and it's always helpful to get another person's perspective on these things.
All right, so switching gears a little bit, just as we asked you all to do in the previous video, we're going to ask you to pause the video and take a couple minutes to answer some of these discussion questions. So first, what are the 10 signs of an unhealthy relationship? Second, why might some people who are in unhealthy or abusive relationships not tell other people about what they're experiencing? What might make them feel scared or worried or whatever feeling about letting other people in on what's happening to them? And then the third question is, although we don't want anyone to stay in a relationship that's unhealthy or abusive, sometimes it's not so easy to get out. So we want you all to think first, in general, what are some of those barriers that could prevent somebody from leaving an unhealthy or abusive relationship? And second, what about specific to your school? All right, so now we're going to switch over to a different topic. So not specifically focusing on some of those signs and behaviors about relationships, but what if it's somebody that you care about that's experiencing some of those things? What if it's a friend or a family member or somebody that you just want to check in on and make sure they're okay? So a couple of initial tips before we begin about how to support someone who has been hurt. The first thing that I want to mention is it's okay if you don't have the perfect thing to say. More often than not, what's going to make your friend feel better is that you're there for them and that you're listening, not really what you're saying. And if you're unsure of what to say, you can always admit it. It's okay to be honest. You can say something like, I'm not really sure what to say, but I'm just glad that you told me. Saying something like that will affirm your friend for trusting you and confiding in you. Second, don't assume you know exactly how they're feeling or what's best for them. At the center, we work to empower individuals to make their own choices, since they're the only ones that know what's best for them. Even if you have been in a similar situation before, what worked for you might not work for them. Third, don't directly confront an abuser or anyone that's been hurting somebody that you care about. This could be unsafe for you and could potentially lead to your friend being hurt even more. And then the last thing we want to note is there are some situations you're just not going to be able to handle yourself. There are situations that we're not going to be able to handle ourselves. In those times, it's best to identify an adult you trust and ask them for help. Obviously, these kinds of situations vary. Somebody being broken up with or somebody being cheated on is very different from somebody being in an abusive relationship. And for those situations that are more serious, we suggest you bring in somebody who can properly support you and your friend. All right, so now we're going to ask you all to do a little bit of reading on your own. So just before you go, even when you feel like there's nothing you can do, don't forget that by being supportive and caring, you're already doing a lot. Your support does matter, and even if you don't have the right words to say or if you can't think of the right phrasing in the moment, just by being there, you're doing a lot. All right, so we're gonna ask you to pause the video, click on that link in the description, and do a little bit of reading before you come back. Okay, so some key takeaways and some important points to build upon the ones we just spoke about. So one thing I want to note is it's important to avoid why questions and like silver lining statements, we call them. Why questions have a tendency to immediately put somebody on the defensive and kind of make them feel like they did something wrong, even if they didn't. We suggest that you try to ask open-ended questions that offer your friends space and time to process and allow them to take the conversation where they like to go. Also, these silver lining statements, it's best to avoid statements like, at least this didn't happen, or it could have been worse. While statements like that might seem like they're trying to make a positive out of a negative, your friend likely wouldn't have come to you if they weren't worried or concerned, and statements like those may not be the best way to support them. So second, the most important things that you can do are to listen non-judgmentally, remain calm, and believe them. If there's nothing else you can do to support your friend, do these. During this coronavirus pandemic, the conversations that you're having with your friends and the ways that you communicate are going to look a little bit differently, but these are the three most important things that we're going to ask you to do. A few more points. So make sure to tell them what happened to them was not your fault. As Haley mentioned earlier, unhealthy behaviors are not the person's fault that is experiencing them, just the fault of the person who's behaving in that way. In many abusive relationships, the abuser makes the person they're abusing feel like they deserve what happened to them. So make sure that to remind your friend that what happened to them wasn't their fault. Another point is just to provide options and let them choose, but don't get offended if they don't choose to do what you suggested. Everyone takes different amounts of time to work through things. Everyone processes things differently. So just because something worked for you or you think it's a great idea, they might not be there yet. So keep that in mind. Another thing to add is just to remind them of their strengths. We know that especially a lot of emotional abuse can wear someone down and wear down their self-esteem. So make sure to point out what they're good at and things that you're proud of them for. Last couple of things, be patient. As I mentioned before, these things take time. They're not easy and they take some effort into them. So please be patient. Lastly, to note, if your friend is the one that's hurting someone, their behavior is not your responsibility. It's not on you to fix the situation. It's not on you to be the savior of the person they're hurting. That's not fair of us to ask you that. But you might have some ability to sway your friend, and you can potentially use this conversation to talk to them and support them using healthy behaviors.
All right, so now we just have a couple discussion questions for you all, and these are just a couple quick scenarios for you to consider. So the first one, your friend Jamie is upset because their partner told them not to talk to or hang out with your friend group anymore. Jamie threatened to break up if they didn't stop. What's something supportive you could say to Jamie? So this is a tough situation, but it's something that we see a lot in more unhealthy and abusive relationships, and it's that unhealthy sign of isolating somebody from their friend group. So what is something supportive that you could say to Jamie? And then the second one, you try to talk to your friend about their relationship because you think it's becoming unhealthy. Your friend tells you that it's none of your business. How could you respond in a calm, supportive way? So someone telling you that it's none of your business, that's going to be pretty difficult to respond in a supportive way for some people. I know for me, it would be, but that's not uncommon for someone to get defensive if somebody else is trying to tell them something that's probably pretty sensitive to them at that time. Or maybe their partner is telling them that they can't talk about their relationship with other people. So it's important to think about situations like this and expect that kind of response, and then consider how can you still be supportive to that friend. So our final wrap up for today. So first off, we want to remind you that everyone deserves a healthy, nonviolent relationship. So that's you, that's your partner, that's your friends, that's your family. And hopefully you've learned some things today to help you and your friends have more healthy relationships and avoid those unhealthy signs. So when you're supporting a friend, keep the conversation friendly and not preachy. Nobody likes to be told what to do, and nobody likes to be talked to like they don't know what's going on or they don't know what to do. So make sure that you're keeping it friendly, and like Josh said, allow that person to choose what they're going to do. Allow your friend to make their own decisions, because at the end of the day, that's how it's going to last longer, is if they make that decision for themselves. And then again, recognize when to get an expert involved. So that's going to be any situation that involves any type of violence, more of that abusive behavior, if someone is threatening to harm themselves or threatening to harm another person. Those are all definitely situations when you should get an adult involved, like a teacher, a counselor, any of those resources that we listed, the Center for Women and Families, because those situations shouldn't be all on your shoulders. Nobody can handle a situation like that on their own. So make sure that you're recognizing and thinking about when you need to get somebody else involved. And again, we've listed these resources for you all just to have them. Please reach out to them if you feel like you need to. Reach out to us if you have any more questions. And I encourage you all to, again, go explore One Love's website some more. Go explore Love is Respect's website. They've got relationship quizzes, blogs, a lot of fun stuff on their website too. So please go look at those. And thank you all for watching today.